My name is Andy Staples. I'll be a visiting professor at Doshisha Business School working on the Global MBA programme. Well, Professor RWerner, thank you very much for coming here this evening. And I thought it's a very timely position for us to discuss some of the issues that we see in the global economy today, and in particular how those relate to the actuality of Japan's economy, the policies that we see emerging in Japan. We also hear a lot about how Japan can serve as a model or a warning for what not to be doing in this type of situation. And so first of all, I wondered if you could just give us a bit of an idea of how you see the current financial situation, and then perhaps if we could move on to discuss Japan within this.
Well, Japan seems to have been the model of the global financial crisis, because basically all the banking and financial crises that we've seen worldwide, well, they follow the same pattern. And of course, actually, Japan is not the country to invent that. It's an old pattern, decades, in fact, centuries old. And the amazing thing is that these banking-centered economic crises really always follow the same pattern. And each time, the experts, the governments, the media are so surprised from scratch, as if it never happened before, when actually, in the past 30 years, the number of banking crises has increased to a new fever pitch. Over 100 countries have had, this is before the current crisis, so talking in the 30 years, say, up to 2005, over 100 countries had banking and economic crises connected to banking crises, which is the largest number in such a short time period witnessed. So the number of crises actually increased, and there seems very little we ever seem to learn from them. So, I mean, that's the surprising thing and the frustration. But the pattern's the same, and basically the pattern is this. The creators of money create too much of it and allow it to be used for unproductive purposes, namely speculative purposes. And that leads to asset inflation, which then must turn into bad debts. And that bankrupts the banking system. Mm-hmm. And then the banking system, which is the creator of the bulk of the money supply, does not create enough money. And then you move into recession, as even those who make productive use of money, companies that need us to invest, don't get money, can't roll over loans, and go bankrupt, and then the real economy gets hurt very badly, unemployment rises, and so on. So it's always the same mechanism, in fact. And of course, the same applies to the US. People talk about the subprime crisis, and there's lots of unfamiliar concepts to most people being thrown around concerning credit derivatives, and so it has a bit of a sound of a different crisis, but no, it's the same. This was just a good old real estate speculation, of course enhanced and enabled by fancy derivatives, but that's a sideshow really. It is just what we had in Japan in the 80s, excess credit creation used for speculative real estate transactions, which leads to asset inflation, and then a bust banking system.
So the similarities between Japan 20 years ago and the rest of the world, or in particular the United States, United Kingdom, are clear for us to see. The responses then is maybe something that we can move on to, or the lack of response that we saw in Japan initially. And I wonder how that contrasts to what we've been seeing just in the last few months coming out of America and the UK and elsewhere within Europe.
Yeah, well, we have to hope that the responses will not be the same as in Japan, because basically next year Japan will be in the 20th year of recession, more or less. There have been minor recoveries, but basically Japan has remained in the recession that followed its 5-6 year speculative credit boom. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty heavy price to pay for those 6 years of a bubble in the 80s. And of course it tells us that, I mean, this is very unusual. Policymakers are clearly involved in this propagation of the long recession. So far, Britain has been a country that has acted quite similarly to Japan by first slashing interest rates, and just last week again another interest rate cut. We're heading towards zero, and increasing fiscal stimulation to quite dramatic extent. Now, I've already said in the early 90s that even zero interest rates will not help in Japan, and fiscal stimulation, if it is not done the right way, and usually it is not, will not help either. Why is that? Well, interest rates at zero don't help because they don't address the problem. The problem is there's not enough credit creation. It's a quantity issue, not a price issue. And therefore, it's basically irrelevant. Fiscal policy doesn't help because it doesn't create money. You can make it work by linking it to money creation, but that's very rare that this is actually done. Britain is not doing it at the moment. There are some indications that the Federal Reserve under Bernanke may be doing the right thing by monetizing fiscal policy. But it's early days. We'll see whether this is really what's going to happen. They say this is what they will do, but we need to see.
One of the problems we saw in Japan throughout the 1990s and into the 21st century was a lack of demand within the economy. We saw deflation, very destructive in prices. Is this what we can look forward to in the other economies of the world today that are going through the same process of working their way through the excesses of a bubble?
You don't have to have a long recession after excesses of a bubble. You will have a downturn and initially a bust banking system, but there are ways of very quickly reflating and also strengthening the banking system very quickly and getting the banks to lend again. Well, if Japan is the model, then, or should be the model, then let's say Japan 1946, 1947, because then Japan had a banking system that was even more bust than in the early 90s, basically 100% bad debts. And yet, just a few years later, credit creation was expanding rapidly and the economy was recovering because the right steps have been taken. Basically, the Bank of Japan took the bad debts off the bank's balance sheets at zero cost to the taxpayer. So it's not fiscal policy, it's a monetary action by the central bank to basically delete the bad debts.
So this would be the creation of the so bad bank or the toxic bank?
No, not necessarily, because I mean, the central bank could be the bad bank. So you don't need to create another institution. We have enough banks, we've got enough institutions. So that makes me always suspicious when they say, oh, let's create another institution, another bank, another bureaucracy, and new mechanisms. Well, central banks have enough power to solve the crisis in one morning. They haven't done so, and therefore anything more complex makes me suspicious that maybe the goal is really not to immediately reflate.